So I think by and large the dominoes are done falling, so let's assess. Hey folks, now I know I said before I was not going to do any kind of follow-up on Neil Gaiman. However, that meant specifically I'm not following up on any new allegations or unless something comes out that like completely upends the narrative, and that has not happened. So that's not what I'm doing at all. That having been said, there are a number of works of his that were in various stages of adaptation, and I kind of want to go over the fallout and where all of these stand at present. Now, I hope you'll also indulge me a little bit because this is the first video I'm shooting following the election results. So, you know, I kind of needed to softball one a little bit because the stuff that I had initially kind of scheduled for this was more work intensity and uh, for various reasons, I found myself a little lower on energy. But let's move on from that. Definitely don't want it to be the focus here or really on this channel. It is what it is. So, there are 4 works that I could find that were in various stages of adaptation and development that were based on pieces by Neil Gaiman. He was directly involved in the production of some of them, and others he was not. So that is what I'm going to be going over. And I'm not going to be judging anyone for any of these things if and when some of them come out, if they ever do, whether or not you get involved with them and watch them or what have you. I think that when we make the decision to cut off a particular creator because we're no longer comfortable with them, cut them off from our lives and not contribute to them anymore, it gets a little bit more difficult when it comes to adaptations, or if not more difficult as a decision, more nuanced, because there's other people involved than just that person. And it is a way that I'm able to still take some enjoyment from some works that were involved with, say, Joss Whedon, because I put the focus on the other people involved, the actors, the other writers, etc., and I sort of mentally frame him out. It's kind of like cutting your ex out of a picture where it was you and a bunch of your friends. But I also recognize that other people will want more of a hard, clean cut. I'm not going to judge you either way. I will sort of note for myself whether or not I intend to take a look at any of this, because that was something that I did kind of bring up at the end of the last video that I did on Gaiman, and I am going to kind of revise and touch base on that notion overall. So, as I said, we've got 4 to do. Let's get the easy one out of the way. An adaptation of The Graveyard Book was in the works at Disney. It was very early. They'd really just gotten the licensing and the rights sorted, and we're just at the very start of that. Gaiman himself was not going to be involved in that production at all. Like, he wasn't writing the script, he wasn't producing or even executive producing or anything like that. But it was still very early in the process. And when the news broke of the allegations against Gaiman, again, I'm not going to reiterate any of that. I have 2 whole previous videos that you can take a look at. I'll have links in the description for those. But once the allegations came out, that was officially paused. We have not heard anything else since then, so I expect that to just be quietly dropped, because that's just the easiest thing for them to do. Even though Gaiman himself wasn't going to be involved in production, his name is still on the original works, and at that point it's like, we've spent almost nothing on this yet. Let's not sink money into something that could end up being a problem for us. So that is just dead in the water. So that's the easy one. Then there is Sandman Season 2. Now, this one is already filmed and appears to continue to be in post-production. They actually released a sort of behind-the-scenes sneak peek-ish kind of video mid-September, meaning after the initial batch of allegations. So they do appear to still be moving forward with this, which is not surprising given how expensive that series is and how far along production was already. Now, that is something that Gaiman was directly involved in, not as much as he was with some of the other stuff we're going to talk later, but he did have some degree of involvement with it. And I fully expect that that will still come out. I also expect that Netflix is going to do a much, much, much softer marketing push for this one than they did last time. I expect that they will release a proper trailer, maybe 2, and that'll probably be it. I don't think they're going to do a full marketing push with press junkets and having the directors or the actors or whatever give interviews. I don't think they're going to be dropping, the news of, oh, here's the first look of this character the way that they did with the first season because people are going to keep bringing this up. And few things dampen a press circuit as being continually asked about the allegations against somebody involved in production. It puts a damper on things real quick. And I think I fully expect this to be the last season of Sandman. Whether it was originally planned to be that or not, that is what I am expecting at this point. And it will probably be exacerbated by the fact that I fully expect them to do a very soft marketing push on this. Just put it out because they've already spent so much money on it. It is in their best interest to put out what was not really basically finished, but too far along to be worth stopping. So they are going to put it out. I expect that they won't do a 3rd season regardless of the numbers that it will do, but because I expect them to do a much gentler marketing push, I also don't expect it to do nearly as good numbers as the 1st season did either. But that will come out. At least I certainly expect that it will, and I'll be surprised if it doesn't. The 3rd one is weird, and it's weird even completely separate from everything that's gone on with Gaiman. Because there has been in the works for a while now an adaptation over at Amazon Prime of Anansi Boys. Now, this is technically a spin-off from American Gods, but this adaptation of that book was not going to have anything to do with the previous TV adaptation of American Gods that went on over at Starz, which has its own long, incredibly troubled production history. Short version, 1st season's amazing. 2nd season was a disaster. I didn't even bother with the 3rd one. But this is technically a spinoff, but there's going to be no connections. They are not bringing Orlando Jones in to play Anansi, which is a shame because he was an absolute highlight of both seasons of American Gods that I saw, and by far the best thing of the 2nd season. But it was going to be its own independent thing, which it certainly could be. I've read the book Anansi Boys. It works as a completely standalone piece, even though it is technically a spinoff. You don't have to address anything that came about in American Gods. Now, the reason I say that this is weird, this whole thing, is that this television, I guess, miniseries, we'll call it, I guess it's possible they could have been setting up for multiple seasons. Depends on how much of the book that is being covered, which I couldn't find one way or the other. But it has been filmed completely. Production is done and has been done for about 2 years. Production wrapped in 2022. And we've heard not a lot about it since then. Exacerbating things is the fact that the showrunner, or I guess co-showrunner on that, Douglas McKinnon, quit during the post-production. Now, he was also the co-showrunner on Good Omens, and he left that before there was any movement on the 3rd season. If you hadn't guessed, Good Omens is the one I'm going to end on, so stick a pin in that. We'll come back to it. But since the announcement of Douglas McKinnon leaving, and we still don't know why. Like, it's very easy when somebody like Gaiman in this case has trouble that has come up with him, and to find out that some of his creative partners had abandoned him, to assume like, oh, they knew and they found out and they don't want anything to do. Like, there's no evidence of that. That would all be conspiratorial thinking. We do not know why he left, this or Good Omens. We just flatly don't. It is an open question as to what has been taking so long. Now, Gaiman was directly involved in the production of Anansi Boys, similar to how he was with Good Omens. He was co-show running with Douglas McKinnon. But the reason that Gaiman wasn't solo show running these things and was doing it with someone else is because he's a writer, he's an author, he's not a television showrunner. That's not his primary skill set. He has been developing, obviously, some experience in that, but he was being paired with someone more experienced to be able to move it forward. So what's possible, and maybe the reason this has been held up so long is that with McKinnon leaving, that took possibly the person who was doing a lot more of the guidance of the nuts and bolts day-to-day sort of thing. That's a little bit of speculation on my part. We don't know if that's the case. But one would imagine that the showrunner leaving would be a reason that the thing is stalled, because this thing was already stalled before the Gaiman accusations came out. So that is possible. But even replacing the showrunner 2 years since production wrapped, I suppose the other possibility is that it could just be such a heavy amount of post-production work being done on it, CGI and who knows what else, that it's just taking that long, which, if I were to be deeply optimistic, which I'm not, to be clear, but if I were to be very optimistic, I could say that, if they are going heavy CGI, which to my memory of that book, you don't necessarily need to do. It depends on how you deal with certain aspects. But potentially it could be a heavy CGI production. It certainly could go that direction. That if it was that if they are not crunching and having unhealthy working conditions for their VFX teams, yeah, this might actually be a reasonable amount of time for how long it would take, given that this is going to be like 3 movies worth of stuff, most likely. That's the optimist in me. I don't actually think that's the case, though. But I'll acknowledge it's at least possible. There is a possibility that there's an ethical reason why, because, you shouldn't be heavily crunching your effects workers. I guess it's hard for me to believe that Amazon would be leading the charge on that. There's also the distinct possibility that there's just issues with it. Again, completely separate from Gaiman. The thing that I think is going to be the ultimate determining factor on whether or not this ever comes out, I think will have to do with what the reason for the delay is. If, and this is a big if, this is just as speculative as anything else I've said about this one. If the reason for the delay is they were looking at it and going, this isn't working, we need more time, we got to rework, we got to rewrite, we got to do whatever. If that's the reason for the delay, or if the networks or the studios are just looking at it going, we don't think this is very good, figure out a way to fix it. If that's the reason for the delay, it might never come out. And they might just cut their losses at that point. But if they do think it is good, if it is Good Omens quality, if it is first season of American Gods quality, that is a thing worth putting out. But then the question becomes, what the hell's the holdup? I suppose the one other possibility I'll float is that they might have been gearing up and getting ready to announce, say, a release date, because this isn't officially canceled either, but they haven't announced a release date. But that when the Gaiman news broke, they were just like, oh, okay, we're going to keep quiet on that. So we might end up with something not dissimilar to what I expect is going to happen with Sandman Season 2, which is that it gets released with much less fanfare than it might have otherwise. But we'll see. That one is really hard to get a handle on because it's been pretty quiet as a production throughout its entire thing, even before there were any issues. But that brings us finally to the one that had the most recent update. And we found out what was going on with this one last month. Good Omens Season 3. Now, I expressed my doubts as to whether Season 3 was actually going to happen. A lot of people in the comments were like, well, no, we know what's going to happen. They've been filming since back in January. Like, it was confirmed in December of last year that they were going to do Season 3. They were starting pre-production earlier in the year. They were beginning some form of production. I was not able to find out exactly where they were in that, whether they were actually at the point of filming scripts or if they had only just started doing that or what had happened. But they were at some degree of actual production, not just development, but production, when the news broke about the allegations against Gaiman. And at that point, production was paused. And following that pause, last month we found out that what will happen with Good Omens Season 3 is that it will be changed from 6 episodes of approximately an hour each, which is how the previous 2 seasons worked, are instead going to be condensed into one single 90-minute episode. it's basically getting the Owl House treatment. It is getting the treatment that says we are not going to put the time and the money into this that a full season would do, but enough people really, really, really want this that we will put out something that will finish the story, but that's it. And I'm not super shocked by this. It is in some ways disappointing because I would say that if you are a fan of any of these things, this is the one that would have been the easiest to divorce Gaiman from creatively, because it was going, I mean, the original Good Omens novel is not written not only by him, but also the late great Terry Pratchett. And while season 2 was by and large Gaiman's own conception and idea, that was a bridging narrative that he came up with to get into season 3, which to the best of my knowledge, was going to be based on the outline and notes and concepts that he and Pratchett had come up with when they were discussing a potential sequel when Pratchett was still alive. So Pratchett's fingerprints and ideas and notions were going to be in this season, which makes it a little bit easier to not necessarily think, oh, I'm watching Gaiman. And again, it can get weird and muddy and know how much is one person's contributions, how much is another, but it makes it easier to take this stuff in when you're able to dilute the influence of the person who makes you uncomfortable. But yeah, they are cutting it down by a lot. Now, this is also an Amazon Prime production, which is the same as Anansi Boys. So they have confirmed that production is going to resume early next year in Scotland. So that is all confirmed. It is going to happen. What the impact will be, it's hard to know. If I were to again get a little speculative, at a guess, whatever the outlines that were pre-existing done by Gaiman and Pratchett probably amounted to something along the lines of a 90-minute movie if you just did it straight. But it probably could have been easily padded out with giving some breathing room, some focus to different characters in different episodes, like the show would do. But if you decide to treat that as fat and trim it and just tell the narrative A to B to C, yeah, that's probably what they're going to end up doing. And again, I feel like Owl House is a good comparison to this, because if you look at the last 3 quote-unquote movies, 45-minute specials that wrapped out the Owl House that it had instead of a proper 3rd season, you can see where full episodes would fit that would lengthen this out, that where you could have an episode focusing on this thing that we don't have time to deal with, but is there, and it could have been a thing, but we're just going to do the core narrative across these 3. And I expect it's going to have a very similar feeling with Good Omens Season 3. So the last thing from my part is whether or not I'll be talking about any of these. Last time I said that whether I partake in these or not, which I didn't make a call on at the time, I didn't intend to talk about them. I'm going to make a mild revision onto that. Anansi Boys, I will most likely skip. I guess if a trailer looks really excellent, I might watch it. I don't intend to talk about it. Graveyard Book, it's never coming out. I haven't read that book anyway, so it doesn't matter. Sandman Season 2, I will probably watch. I do not intend to talk about. And even then, I might just end up watching, select parts of it. If it's covering what I expect it to cover, and in some cases I know it is. I know it's dealing with a lot of the Season of Mist storyline, which is probably my favorite Sandman storyline. So it would be hard for me not to at least watch it. I don't intend to talk about it. But Good Omens, I might. I don't know. That one I'm definitely going to watch because I want to know what happens. I want the closure. I've gotten very invested in those characters. And knowing that closure has Terry Pratchett's fingerprints on it makes it, as I said, a little bit easier. Now, again, if you want to be an absolutist, I should just be cutting it off completely and just not doing it at all, because some of Gaiman's work is going to be in there. Exactly how much is unclear, and I'm not just talking about because of the source material. It is the word that Variety had from inside sources was that there was some writing work done by Gaiman and it would be used in the production, but there would not be any participation of him in the proper production. He would not be an executive producer, which he had been in the previous 2 seasons. He's not going to be the actual showrunner. None of that is going to be the case this time. But his writing will still be there. It's vague in a way that to me says they are probably chopping up and mixing and matching and reworking longer scripts, or like scripts for multiple episodes that he had already put in, and figuring out a way to cobble it into a 90-minute. Now, that's not necessarily saying that it's going to be a straight up Frankensteinian production, but that would make the most sense to me, because given the timing of when it was paused, why it was paused, and when the announcement came that it was being changed into a 90-minute movie, I have a hard time believing that he himself was willing to, put in the time and money to rework this into a 90-minute script. I suspect that they have somebody else doing that based off whatever writing he already did, but enough of his original writing exists that he's going to end up getting a writing credit, and there's probably not any way around that. Because to rework it, because under normal circumstances, what might happen with this kind of scandal is you get somebody in to rework the script enough that you don't have to credit the person who's a problem. That would be the normal MO, except that's probably a bad idea given how passionate this fan base is, and I think they know that. So the kind of changes they would have to make to change it drastically enough to take Gaiman's name off it would probably mean dropping any and everything that the fans actually want and pissing everybody off. So that's why I expect they have to admit to the fact that he did do writing for the show, while also being, as I said, kind of on the vague side about it. But if I were to guess how they're pulling it together, that would be my guess. I've gotten way more speculative this video than I usually do. It's something I tend to avoid for the most part, but I always try and be clear when I'm being speculative, because there's a bit to be speculative about. And I do think, well, no, I know that I'm going to watch that one. And there is a decent chance that I will talk about it. And I will talk about it through the lens of the characters, through the lens of 2 fantastic actors, fully embodying characters who I love and adore, and possibly the last remaining unpublished notions, story ideas, and beats from a master of the craft, that is Terry Pratchett. That might give me enough distance where I'll feel comfortable talking about it. It won't be without caveats. Heck, I can't even do a Doctor Who list and, mention that, and it's nice that Jack Harkness shows up in this episode without making a quick note. Yes, I've talked about the scandals with John Barrowman. I accept that. I'm just not dealing with it. I can't even do a list of Doctor Who episodes without adding on that. So yeah, if I talk about this, it's going to be caveated. But I think more than any of the others, honestly, Good Omens, as much as Gaiman was involved, feels the least like his production. And you could call this rationalization or cope. But what I mean by that is Sandman is purely his creation. It's incredibly Gaiman. So would Anansi Boys be, in theory, if it comes out and stays true to the original work. I mean, the original work of Good Omens, as I said, it's hard to even nail down whose it is, whether it's more Gaiman's or more Pratchett's, but it does read in terms of the style as being more Pratchett. Now, that's not me saying that he wrote most of it and Gaiman took credit. No, my suspicion is that Gaiman probably adapted his writing style to feel more like Pratchett so that their stuff meshed together. Because that is something he can do. I read a book he wrote that was a biography of Douglas Adams, and he wrote it in Douglas Adams's writing style. That was one of the things I really liked about that book. So he's actually quite capable of doing that. And that, I suspect, is why Good Omens, even as Neil Gaiman was the one directly involved in the scripts and the showrunning and everything else, he seemed to be far more interested in preserving the Terry Pratchett-ness of it than anything else. Word on that first season is actually that he didn't really want to showrun it, but he wanted to be sure that nobody messed up this work done by his friend who was no longer around. So there is a Pratchettness to Good Omens that makes it a little easier to minimize in your head Gaiman's participation. Of course, that doesn't mean that he isn't participating or hasn't. And he'll probably make something off of whatever his contributions were. And if that makes you too uncomfortable to watch it, fair. Very, very fair. I won't judge you for that, actually. I tip my hat to you. Walking away from these things can be very difficult. But that's kind of where I'm landing right now. And when we eventually get the third season, or the final movie, I suppose, of Good Omens, yeah, I'm going to watch it. And I might even talk about it. And maybe if I really like it, maybe I will do that burlesque duet number that I thought of Aziraphale and Crowley. Maybe. I don't know, though. We'll see. I mean, it'll all be moot if it comes out and sucks. If it's just trash. Because that wouldn't even be interesting to talk about, because it'll just be like, oh, well, this is trash because they had to chop it down into 90 minutes. Of course it's junk. So if it's bad, it wouldn't even be in a way that would be interesting to talk about. So I am kind of presuming it's still going to be good. It might not be. Then I really won't have anything to say. But as I said, I kind of needed a bit of a softball topic. It's weird to call anything Gaiman-related softball topic, given how heavy the allegations against him are and how much time I have spent talking about the man. But in terms of the workload for me, this is a bit of a lighter lift. And that's kind of what I need to get back into the groove. So I appreciate you indulging me on that. What are your thoughts on any of this, whatever they are? Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like and share and subscribe. They'll help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember, especially now and for the next 4 years, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now I'd like to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernambulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajoggle, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. They're all calmer this time because they're eating papaya. Whatever works.